Intensity is something that you cannot define. And who judges whether there is intensity? When you're an artist, you don't know. You seek it, but you don't know when it happens. But when you look at art, how can you know what is intense, what isn't? So it is filtered through your own personal, idiosyncratic, subjective, temporary sensibility. So here we come to the result of the modern movement, and it cuts through the taxonomic differences, like abstraction and realism, big and small, new and old, and whatever. So when people get very critical of this, which I say, says, yeah, but there must be a solution. And I remind them that in the 20th century, there were a few people looking for solutions, right? Alas, even our friends, Mondrian and the surrealists and others, were looking for solutions. So contemporary art now, and American art abstract artist is doing it without knowing it, is not looking for solutions anymore. Everyone is pursuing his or her universe within the terms that are more keen to their intellect and their sensibility. I was interested in poetry more than art, but I was especially interested in escaping the environment I was born in. After a while, my mother married a British sculptor. The sculptor was called Michael Noble, and that changed my life. I was 16, and at one point I was in some boarding school, and I came home, and there was a piece of raw marble, and introduced himself, and then with a charcoal he traced the oval on this marble, gave me a scalpel and a hammer, and he said, now if you do this, you can make a hole there. And we start the sculpture. That was my introduction. And Michael Noble was very keen on breaking down the categories. He had a couple of shows, and I found documents that he wrote about them, in which he stated that he did not want to conform to this practice of developing one single line of work that then gets slightly varied only for the benefit of criticism or display. And I did not know it at the time, but I realized later on, as I had the guts to begin to change and vary in my art, that he influenced me even in that. In 1984, I think, or 85, Meryl Wagner, who was the president of AAA, asked me to become a member. And I said, yes, if they accept the fact that they do also things in which you recognize images and figures. I radically go from Zig to Zag, to then return to Zig when that becomes fresh again. Anyhow, for me, the difference between figuration and abstraction was a pressing concern always. And I basically don't make that distinction anymore. I find it to be a bureaucratic distinction, something that serves only the disease of taxonomy of our culture. Because we don't have Madonnas, Buddhas, sacred calligraphies to latch our art onto. Now we are panically looking for something to hold on to that at this point, serve only the market. I was very lucky to be supported by a great gallery man called John Weber in New York. But he had the guts in the first show to really break all the taboos that he himself had been sustaining. Some friends I'd met in Rome, American friends, told me there was a position for professor of modern architecture and art at the Cooper Union. So I worked months in preparing this lecture, which was on 2 screens. 2 artists who were born at the same time and more or less, and dead more or less at the same time, and were for me the epitome of the oxymoron situation of contemporary art. Giorgio Morandi and Marcel Duchamp. One lived the whole life in a little village, living with his sisters in a small room. The other one traveled and became international and was controversial. Even at the time I gave this lecture, Duchamp was being not particularly liked by many people in New York or anywhere. My audience was the dean, the head of the department, one student, and the projectionist. 200 empty chairs. And that's how I started performing. While teaching at Cooper Union, I began to question the premises of the whole modern movement. The modern movement was born as a challenge to all the conformities of the past. In other words, what was still at the time called avant-garde, the mid-60s, had an unwritten instruction manual. And at museums, galleries, magazines, everyone followed this kind of program. There were, at the time in New York, people were making lists of how to make art. So around 1965, 66, I invented a thing called the inventory game, which is what I still follow now. It is my practice and my theory. The idea was very simple. Every work of art is the result of a cocktail of ingredients. Ingredients being concept, processes, and materials. So with that inventory game, which is a grid, in which I took ingredients as found in magazines or as seen around or in my own practice, and put them in a grid, and I told my students to close their eyes and with a pencil mark the grid 5 to 7 times, and then make art with whatever the pencil had touched. What I invented for myself was derived from the tradition of collage, which I think is the biggest invention in modern art. There were already examples of representations in the past that already were similar to collage. The Renaissance painter who copies a pinned document with the writing on it in his painting, and then the 19th century, especially in America, the people who made constructions and depicted them, so that was already beginning to put together information. By putting things together, they become congruent just because they're there. It really represents the fragmentation of everything that was expected to be whole in the millennia of the past, because of social, political, and religious reasons, and economic reasons, and it casts doubt about the expectation of wholeness. What is absurdity? It comes from absurdum. It means from hearing things like a surdo, like a deaf person hears. And absurdity is the key. Instead of communication, creative misunderstanding is the key to the exchange in contemporary art. The end is a big problem. Cézanne died, and the year after his death, there was a retrospective of him in Paris, which had always avoided him. And Picasso went to see it. And they were the last paintings of Cézanne, in which there was a white canvas, a few touches here for a tree, a few lines there for a house, and the canvas was basically untouched for the rest. So this was Cézanne bringing to the extreme a tradition which was born in the 19th century, when certainties were beginning to be doubted. And in the 19th century in France, the unfinished became very important. And Picasso came out mumbling to a friend who transcribed this sentence, a sentence that to me is equivalent to the invention of the law of relativity by Einstein just a couple of years before. And he said, "From now on, a painting is finished from the first brushstroke onwards." The only peace I found is knowing I will never resolve anything, I will never conclude anything, I will never be about anything specific, and yet inevitably, without wanting, I'll be myself, my time, and my place.